Hit the button. Hello and welcome to movieboozer.com, and this is the virtual pubcast. I'm your host, Ken Ekman, and today Bill Arsenault's joining us,
Again, finally, he's
and Hawk
returned.
Ripjaw. Again.
Hi.
Yes.
That's all you got.
Quite.
Hi.
So we were not here last week, so we have quite a few movies to talk about on this 4th of July. We'll start with a movie that Bill, you had a chance to see this as an early screener on the 7th day. Tell me about it. I have not heard of this
on the
movie.
seventh day. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to state that or say that we're doing this podcast a little earlier than normal to get away from the fireworks that's bound to happen in our areas. So the sound's going to be, obviously devoid of fireworks, hopefully, unless there's a jerk in your neighborhood, in either of our neighborhoods.
My town will literally be lit.
Fireworks are illegal in Illinois unless you have a license. So
okay, my town's definitely going to do it, but
I mean, yeah, but there's a difference between illegal and doing it.
Right.
Oh yeah, people were firing them off earlier. They do it anyway, but the big ones won't go off because the cops are on patrol and they will find you.
Oh wow, okay.
I mean, if only there was a way to telegraph where you're firing off fireworks.
Gee, I wonder how. On the seventh day, this is a film by Jim McKay, who has done some television work and he did some feature films.
He directed episodes of The Wire. I recognize him from that.
Yeah, and he did some feature films earlier in his career. I don't believe I've ever seen those films. That he was kind of a new name to me. Aside from television, I hadn't really known him. But I've been working with this new magazine called Big Easy Magazine. It's an online publication, bigeasymagazine.com. And we were looking to do a movie review this past month. And I wanted to find something that kind of fit in with some of the articles we were doing. One of them was about the immigration crisis that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And on the seventh day, while it's not specifically about the crisis, it is about immigrants and their day-to-day lives in Brooklyn. I kind of thought, oh, well, that ties in, and maybe that would be kind of a fanciful evening of delights, maybe, And indeed, it was. Fortunately, I was given a Vimeo screener for it, and I was able to watch it in bed with headphones on. That was nice. That was very comfortable. It was more comfortable than the character of Jose. Than he's ever been in America. Jose is the main character of this movie. He's a young man from Mexico who lives in an apartment with several other Mexican workers, all men, and they live in, I believe it's a particular park section of Brooklyn. I forget the name of the park though, but they live by a park where they play soccer every Sunday, and in between playing soccer, they also work throughout the week, every day, 12, 18 hours, however many hours they can get in, they work. Jose's job is he's a delivery boy for a local restaurant, and he'll get on his bike, he'll zoom through the city, deliver food all day.
Get chased by an angry Michael Shannon.
That doesn't happen, though. That would have been interesting if that was a curveball. But no,
like the new element of the subgenre.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just have Michael Shannon chase it.
The funny thing about this movie is it very much has. It's not an action movie. Obviously, it's more of a day-to-day, day in the life of kind of movie. But it does have a documentary, voyeuristic style to it that kind of puts you in the seat in a way. It puts you there. In Brooklyn as potentially someone walking around and who notices Jose. It's really interesting because how it plays with the whole narrative structure of, so how the style. What I'm getting at is how the documentary-like style of the photography kind of plays into its own narrative, which is just Jose's week.
Hmm.
Jose starts this particular week off, and this is the mid 2016, summer of 2016, when we were all so naive before the election of Trump, and we all thought, oh, that asshole's not going to win. He's a clown. We got nothing to worry about. So that's never really foreshadowed in the movie. We don't see posters. We don't see none of that stuff because Jose doesn't give a crap at this point in time. That's not affecting his life right now. He's too busy wound up with trying to rise up and getting a promotion. He wants to go from a restaurant delivery boy to a bus boy, and then he can rise up to something else and maybe one day become a manager or a shift leader or something. This is actually his world, and this is what he wants to accomplish in his world. He's a hard worker.
Right.
Everyone always compliments him on all this, but he has a passion for soccer that is almost unparalleled, and he's a great soccer player. And he plays in the local community league with his friends, but he's told by the main conflict of the film is that he's told by his boss that they need him on Sunday, which is the day of a tournament game. And this obviously disappoints him because he's like, well, I can't lose my job, but I really like this game. So he's a little confused as to what to do. He struggles to find the words to tell his friends, but he knows in his heart he should probably just work that day. It's amazing in the film how things end up working out for him and his friends, and how his friends and his community come together to kind of find a compromise on that day. They all know that he loves soccer and he deserves a day off. So they kind of come up with a scheme. I don't want to give everything away, but they come up with a scheme where they basically order food to the location of the game, and they just keep ordering food. It's one of those kind of things. It's very simple. This movie, in how it's shot.
It sounds like it sounds like a slice of life sort of
It
story
is a
where
slice of life
yeah.
type of story. Yeah, it's simply shot. It's simply written. It's I don't want to say it's simply acted. I think the acting is very genuine and pure.
Hmm.
But maybe there is something simple to that. But there is a complexity to, like, almost beyond the simplicity. It's like I was trying to get at before, but I was struggling to find the words. Um, the documentary voyeuristic style, it can kind of go two ways. It can go with the way of we could be in the shoes of someone that normally doesn't notice Jose, because Jose is just some guy that rides a bike and delivers food. Who gives a fuck? And we're forced to actually now, that because he's the center of our story, we're forced to view him now. Or two, we could be the kind of background foreboding ICE agent, ready and willing to strike at any moment. That's never really brought up, except in a few sequences where we hear that friends of his got picked up by cops,
Right.
and he feels bad about it, but he's like, I got to keep doing my thing, even though I'm illegal. I got to keep working. I feel bad for those guys, but they knew the risk when they came over this way.
Hmm.
He, Jose, he's a very passionate guy. He's a very generous guy. He's a very loving guy, and it's just one of those movies that just kind of fills you with joy
Okay.
in a way,
So
despite the fact that
it's
it's
kind of uplifting, but at the same time, it deals with some.
it's uplifting, but it deals with the service industry, where it's kind of almost the underground service industry, where it's people that normally don't get attention, because we don't like to talk about it as much.
Right.
But
Right.
the cool thing about this movie, in its style, is that it really showcases how the people of Brooklyn, just the regular American citizen people of Brooklyn, who didn't come over illegally or by other means or whatever, people that were born here or moved here, they treat Jose and his friends very fairly. they're not being racist. They're not being. There's one character that's kind of a jerk, but he's more of a jerk in a passive way. He's like, "Oh, I didn't order that." One of those kind of things.
The way you're describing this, it's kind of reminding me of. I have not seen this movie. I've just heard him describe it in an interview. I was listening to an interview with Sean Baker.
Mm-hmm.
Florida Project and
Tangerine. Yeah, Tangerine,
yeah. One of his earliest films is a film called Takeout that is basically it's about the day a day in the life of an illegal Chinese immigrant who works at a Chinese takeout shop in New York.
Oh, I've heard of this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So what you're describing sounds very similar because it's illegal immigrant. Illegal immigrant is a different community.
Just a different community, yeah, but it's essentially the same job. That's what they, he can easily get hired as, or hopefully easily get hired as. And in my review, I wrote something to the effect of I started it off with saying, "I huff and puff down and up sets of stairs." While Jose, an illegal immigrant, he rides through New York City swiftly, calmly, confidently, and with precision, delivering food. And I was like, if that doesn't earn you citizenship, when me, like just some fucking overweight, lazy, schmuck, and with a gut, and him, this strapping young man, I mean, it's obvious who should be in this country, I mean, I'm glad I'm here, but also, I think, I like to think I'm pro immigration. I believe I am, I'm on that side where like we should go even further and just open the borders up if we have the housing for these people, if they want to become citizens. I think that's great.
They're really those immigrants who work those jobs are truly pursuing the traditional definition of the American dream. They really are.
That's essentially what it is, and that's what this movie is. And like I was saying before about how the Brooklynites are taking them in as their own, that almost brought a tear to my eye, because I was like, wow, there's no real racism in this movie. It's really just like a bunch of workers, service workers, and they all understand their, whether it's a fellow New Yorker or an illegal immigrant or whatever, they all understand they're in the same machine. They're in they're the same cog in the machine of America, and they might as well treat each other with some modicum of respect. And that was very, very nice to feel and understand. The movie ends on a very nice note. I don't want to give away exactly what happens at the climax or whatever, but obviously the conflict of the movie is him worrying about his job and playing the soccer game. The final shot of the movie is him and his friends walking down the street in Brooklyn, and they see I guess I don't want to call him a mariachi player, but I guess that's what he is. And he's playing just a tune on the side of the street. They kindly give him some change, despite the fact they don't have that much money themselves. And the man in the hat, calmly takes it out, puts it in his pocket, closes his case, and just kind of smiles for a second, And it's kind of nice, The movies are very much about community, very much about multicultural community.
It's nice when you see a movie set in a low-income community that isn't meant to be, oh, how hard it is to live here. This is, dealing with crime or exploitation. Yeah. The movie, it sounds like, is depicting them just as they're, in their day-to-day life as people who are just, like everyone else, surviving day to day.
Right. They could very well. I mean, this particular week, they didn't face any crime. They didn't face any exploitation, really. But, very well they could, in reality, face those circumstances.
And I'm sure they have before and will after. But, the fact is that, no one lives their life constantly on the edge. If they do, then they don't live very long.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so, I like that when a movie goes out of its way to tell a smaller story.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I loved it. I loved it so much, and probably because I haven't seen too many movies lately, because I've just been working really hard on this, magazine and on
Sure.
this recent move that I did. Um, that I guess by default, I was like obligated to give it 5 stars, even though I give movies 5 stars very often. But in this case, I felt like it deserved it truly because it just was this bright spot in an otherwise bleak landscape, and it was done so well and so evocative. It was so evocative, and it was almost provocative because it was evocative in a way, and it stands as one of my favorites of the year.
And I see that it's going to be getting an expansion in the next week, so I will look for it. If I have a chance to see it, I will.
Yeah,
Okay,
same.
Good.
Thank you for that review.
You're welcome.
Speaking of tears,
Yes.
Jurassic World or
Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Oh, won't you? Oh, I've been wanting to see this for a while now. I think everyone wants to see Mr. Rogers documentary.
So, did either of you get choked up during the trailer for Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Well, here's the thing. I feel like I need to put this out there. I've written a paper on Mr. Rogers before, a research paper, so I know a lot of his story, and so I've been choked up about thinking about who he was as a human being for a long time, and so the trailer didn't do it, but I could tell that that's what it was going to do. And the movie, though, there were a couple moments where I certainly got pretty emotional.
Yeah, I had to really I was seeing it with somebody, so I had to hold it together. But in the second half, this movie is an endurance test for holding back tears.
Yeah, bro, I won't cry. Men don't cry. Men don't cry, bro.
Exactly,
bro.
Because it's not like the movie is sad. I mean, it's not sad at all, except for a couple of moments where just kind of you're sad for the way some people are. But the 98% of the movie is emotional for how powerful the movie's themes are and how much Fred Rogers embodied these themes.
And I think it's just it's another example of a thesis that I made a long time ago, which is Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, was basically a saint. There's just there's very little that you can find about him that that is depicted negatively. And
right.
I mean, the few moments in this film that do deal with some slightly negative elements are quickly rebounded on.
Well, I had a thought about his Mr. Clemens, the police officer.
Yes.
And how Mr. Rogers forbade him from going to the gay clubs and flaunting his gay lifestyle because they'd lose their sponsorship from their things. And at first I was like, oh, Mr. Rogers is very, very conservative, very Christian. He didn't really, he wasn't quite into the gay lifestyle, but he loved Mr. Clemens despite that. But then I realized that if Clemens had put his image of that before the children, like if they had lost that sponsorship, the show would not be able to continue, and
right.
Mr. Rogers would lose being able to teach these kids, and that was what it was. Not any sort of bigotry. It was, look, Mr. Clemens, we're losing our message to the kids if you do this.
And it is sad because this was the late 70s, early 80s when this sort of thing happened, and that was really not a good time for people to come out. And so I get why that happened, and at the same time, not that I condone it, but it's not a deal breaker for a person at that time, because it was just simply it would have destroyed his show if it happened.
Exactly.
And that's, I mean, you have to make a decision in that respect. And the fact is that, I mean, he came back and, later in interviews, what I found fascinating is Clemens was talking about Mr. Rogers and how basically, even in spite of that, Mr. Rogers was basically the father he never had, and he breaks down crying as a result of
that was
realizing.
That was one of the best scenes in the movie where Clemens is saying how Mr. Rogers, one of his main things was, I like you just the way you are. Mm-hmm. And Clemens says, is that like, are you talking to me when you say that? And Rogers says, I've always been talking to you when I've said that. That was one of the most powerful moments in the film, because that kind of, like you said, when they rebounded on a slightly negative aspect of Rogers, is that, like, you know what, he didn't want Clemens to be openly gay on his show. He didn't want, or he encouraged Clemens to get married to kind of fit into this, at the time, more normative lifestyle. But throughout that whole thing, he knew that Clemens was gay, and he really didn't have any issue with it personally.
Right.
And given that Rogers is Presbyterian and very religious and very conservative, like they mentioned at that time or earlier in the film, Mr. Rogers is very conservative and very Christian. And, you get all this. I have a lot of Christian friends on Facebook that are like, oh, being gay is wrong. And it's like, what's more wrong than calling yourself a Christian and saying that somebody else is that they themselves, because of their existence and how they are, is wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact is, from a Christian perspective, Mr. Rogers truly practiced judge not. Yeah. Judge not, ye less, lest ye be judged.
Like it's up to interpretation, but something like that.
The judge not lest ye be judged. Yeah.
Right.
The angriest Mr. Rogers ever got, as far as this documentary showed, was somebody else giving children the wrong message.
Mm-hmm.
And the documentary actually has this really, really great stylistic way of illustrating the cacophony of children's television at that time, of people, slapstick violence and people getting hit in the face and falling down. Mm-hmm. You get this very, 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 very constricted. It's the same aspect ratio as like First Reformed most recently, where it's just kind of like a square in the center of the screen. Mm-hmm. And it's showing this, and then it just kind of keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, like the image is engulfing you and becoming very overwhelming, and how loud and obnoxious and colorful it is.
And it does make a point that kids shows, a lot of them are just vapid as hell. And if, children are, they're growing, the whole point of being a child is figuring out how this whole human thing works, and, figuring out how to make it on your own.
Yeah.
And Mr. Rogers' goal with his show and everything he practiced was to prepare children for the future by making sure that, and doing it in a positive way, to make them the best person that they could be, and allowing them to be creative the way they want to be, and recognizing that, it is a cliche to say that everyone is special, because that does insinuate, if everyone's special, then no one is. But here's the thing. Everyone is unique. I won't even use the word special. No two people are exactly the same. And that makes you a rare individual, because there will never be a person before or after you who is exactly like you are.
Besides the Winklevoss twins in The Social Network.
Well, even them. I mean, they
because they're played by the same person.
Well, not just that, but also just because they look like each other because they're twins doesn't mean they're exact doubles.
No, I mean that's the joke, that they're literally doubles, because Armie Hammer played both of them.
Right.
That's the joke in the movie. Is like,
but
I'm 6'4" and there's two of me.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, everybody is so unique, and Mr. Rogers had it's amazing. I think that he may be a saint at some point because of the way that he treated people. And, letting these children experience life. Like children would have these questions, and he would approach them in this way that is so unique and insightful that so many adults would be terrified to even approach the subject. You know, they had the episode on the JFK's assassination.
It was actually Bobby Kennedy.
But... Bobby Kennedy. I'm sorry, Bobby Kennedy's assassination. They had an episode on divorce. You know, like all these things where kids are gonna have these questions, and their parents would be like, "Oh, you'll learn about this when you're older." Whereas Mr. Rogers in the neighborhood, he'd be like, you know, the girl was, "Oh, you know, it's when assassination is when somebody gets killed kind of by surprise," and that's a very simple and effective and still accurate way of describing that concept to a 5-year-old.
And one thing Mr. Rogers did that I don't even think they mentioned this in the documentary is he never talked down to children. He always approached them from directly as a peer-to-peer kind of conversation. So if a kid asks him a question, he would find a way to answer that question.
One of my favorite moments was when the girl with a disability, I don't know what it was, but she had the helmet on and she had kind of a really pretty severe speech impediment. And she was describing to Mr. Rogers the picture she drew for him. And it took about 2 or 3 times as long to get her sentence out as it would for somebody else to usually say it. And he very patiently listened. Like, you didn't get any... There was no look on his face like he was trying to figure out what she was saying. There was no look of impatience. He waited for her to finish, and he said, "These are very beautiful. Thank you so much." And then he asked her if she wanted to meet one of his characters.
Right.
And his level of godliness is so profound. And
so we've been gushing about Mr. Rogers, the man. We need to talk about the actual documentary and the way it's framed.
Well, we're talking about how the documentary, how it portrays him.
Right. Well, certainly. But I'm just thinking, you know, to move this along, we should get into that. So the way the documentary is told is, you know, it's a very straightforward documentary that takes the Mr. Rogers story from the, you know, from the beginning of his show through to his death, basically. And it's done using archival footage, using interviews with Mr. Rogers, as well as, you know, his family members, the people who worked on the show with him, people who were guests on the show regularly, like Yo-Yo Ma.
I love the Yo-Yo Ma interviews.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yo-Yo Ma, I think he appeared a few, 3 or 4 times on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But, yeah, and what's unique about it is how in this documentary they point out as comforting and as loving as he was, as an individual, he had this he was a little bit hurt, not hurt. He had this exterior shell of love that he exuded, but to himself, he was constantly questioning whether, you know, what he was doing was making a difference. And
he was very insecure.
Yeah, the insecurity of it, and to the point where it's you have to wonder if, you know, what he was doing, you know, as heavily as he was he was spreading, you know, the word of goodness and being good. That has to take a toll on you, because, you know, it's very much like a charitable service distributing that much, and because, you know, you're giving out so much and you're receiving, well, what, you know, it's hard to explain.
I'll help you out. Mr. Rogers' message is this paragon of goodness and kindness, and he started this whole thing. I mean, he was about to be ordained as a Presbyterian minister, and he started this whole television program because he is that alternative to the tidal wave of just nonsense and filth and emptiness in children's shows at that time. It was all bad messages or empty violence and slapstick and just junk food television. And he was at that time the one person that was the alternative to that. And I think he had that weight on his shoulders of being that one alternative and being that one good voice. As a kid sat down to watch 6 shows, he was the one, and then he'd be followed by 5 shows that did nothing for these kids except maybe give them bad messages of life.
You know, I'm going to use a really, really controversial movie example here. So, Death to Smoochie. In a sense, Mr. Rogers kind of viewed children's television of that time very much the way Death to Smoochie portrays most children's hosts as being just corrupt individuals and not, awful examples for children. And he is this island of kindness amongst these shows that are just designed to distribute cheap laughs.
Yeah.
And
I could see Danny DeVito being a fan of Mr. Rogers, but being a little too nihilistic to do anything about the situation presently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Edward Norton's character in Death to Smoochie kind of felt like an attempt to do a Mr. Rogers-like person because he was a clean-cut person. But even that character, goes places that I don't think Rogers would have.
Yeah, I think in that movie, Ed Norton's character was that kind of person, but he got chewed up and spit out by the industry.
Right. But, it's this documentary is, I think, it is negative as the news has been lately and everything in the world. This movie feels like a call to arms of, stop being so, being so hateful all the time.
I wouldn't even say it feels like it is. It is that call to arms. Like I'm still on this emotional high of the movie where I just want to go out and do some nice things for people. My friend and I, when we saw it, we went and got some dinner afterwards, and there was a family that they were behind us, and I opened the door for them, and they were all like, wow, they're like, thank you. And I was like, it's no big deal to open the door for somebody, but I was like, yes, it's nice things that we're doing for people. It feels good. Mr. Rogers is working right now. And that's what this movie is. It's just this huge emotional high that makes you feel good about doing good to people and for looking for the good in people.
Certainly. Yeah.
One more observation I had is that watching this movie, they were talking about the neighborhood of make-believe, and, seeing this documentary, I could see the set and stuff like that. But I remember back when I watched the show, when the trolley went through the tunnel, I was like, holy shit, it's the land of make-believe. Here we go. And it felt so real. And which was an amazing feeling, remembering that as a kid, is seeing that land of make-believe and how alive it felt. And, they talked at the beginning of the movie about how it's just cheap sets, low production design. But to me, when I watched it, that literally was a different land, which was, I don't know. I really want to go back there. A lot of the early episodes, the first 5 seasons or so, are on Amazon Prime.
Yes.
And I've been kind of picking at them lately, and I hope they keep adding more because I want to get through the whole thing and just kind of see just remember the good messages, because they're not just for kids. It's good messages for everybody to remember the things that Mr. Rogers teaches and the kindness that he imparts and how easy it is to just be good to people.
Now, one thing that the documentary never referenced that I'm a little curious. I'm a little curious as to why, because the documentary, when it was towards the end, when it was dealing with his legacy, one piece of his legacy that is, I think, the most overt was never referenced. The fact that while Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood obviously can't be done anymore, there is a animated PBS series called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, set within the neighborhood of make-believe. That's it's produced by his family, I'm pretty sure. And I'm surprised they didn't talk about that, because I've seen a couple of episodes with my nephew, who's 3 years old, and it very much is in the spirit of Mr. Rogers, in that it deals with feelings and these themes of family oriented issues and confronting everyday problems. And I'm just curious why the documentary didn't even reference that was a thing. I don't know if that was intentionally omission just to focus on Fred, or if it was if there's some sort of comment made against it. Because
I think it was probably more of just the documentary is about Fred and not other stuff that happened after he was gone.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it did deal with his legacy a bit, and I was just curious why it didn't even hint at that. Yeah. Although I will say it did have these wonderful little animated moments.
Those were cool.
Yeah, and the way they draw Daniel Tiger in those animated things, definitely different from the way the PBS show does, but I would love to see that art style brought into, because that's really profound. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and move on then to Jurassic World.
I am really excited to talk about Jurassic World.
Fallen Kingdom.
Because it is really fucking dumb.
It is a hot mess.
Oh, it's a disaster almost, but holy shit, is it a fun one? But not. So I was thinking about this today. Is the Superfly from a couple weeks ago? Superfly is the kind of stupid that is intelligently stupid. It is so cohesively and encapsulatingly dumb. The whole world of this film is so ridiculous. This movie is completely in tune with itself and how stupid it is. And Jurassic World is not.
Yeah, Jurassic World, they thought that they were going to be taking this to the next level, and in doing so, they shat the bed in a lot of ways. Now, that said, I say they shat the bed from an artistic perspective. From a perspective of box office, this movie's kicking ass, so I can't say that it's a failure by any means. What I will say is that I enjoyed the first Jurassic World the first time I saw it, but I have soured on it in the time after. Very much like... I would actually say Jurassic World very much feels to me like when I watched Star Trek Into Darkness the first time, where the first time I watched it, I actually remember enjoying it. And then I saw it the second time, and I wondered what the fuck I was thinking the first time.
Everything in Into Darkness involving Peter Welling is really great, but the rest of it is pretty shitty.
Peter Weller, you mean?
Weller, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, wrote Weller.
Weller, whatever. Who fucking cares?
Actually,
nobody cares about Into Darkness.
Connection. Peter Weller. He and Jeff Goldblum have played jazz together, and Jeff Goldblum is in Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom.
Jeff Goldblum is putting out a jazz album here pretty soon.
Yeah.
So I think Jurassic World had. Here's what I think about Jurassic World is that. Colin, the Book of Henry Trevorrow, wrote this script with one other guy. It was mostly his script, as far as I understand. And then the script takes itself very, very seriously. So it's big and epic and crazy, and I think he thinks he's making this massive sci-fi horror adventure. And then director J.A. Bayona comes in, and it's like, this is dumb. Let's be dumb.
Yeah. And boy, do they ever get dumb.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I want to mention with reference to this movie is I saw an article, a think piece on this movie the day after I actually saw it in theaters, and the article said, when the Jurassic Park franchise turned into Transformers.
Ooh.
And while I will say that this movie, Fallen Kingdom, is still better than any Transformers movie, I kind of agree that that's what it feels like it's starting to move in the direction of just plain lowbrow, throw shit at you on screen shenanigans.
Although, mercifully, we have not had any Imagine Dragons songs yet.
But no, but imagine if dragons were to...
Yes. I fucking guarantee you there's going to be some kind of Imagine Dragons or something like that in the next movie. So the movie is about a lot of things. There's a lot going on in this movie.
So, the first half of the movie is The Lost World Jurassic Park, almost beat for beat.
Yes, it's a remake of The Lost World.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, let's point out the fact that this movie completely discounts the fact that there's a second island.
Yes,
it's completely ignored. And this is canon. This whole movie is canon, and they just fucking forget that there's a second island.
Yeah,
which would negate a lot of stuff.
Yeah, Site B.
Exactly.
That is true. I didn't even think about that until you mentioned it. But yeah, so that automatically is a plot hole in this movie.
Yeah. So the main island from Jurassic World is gonna blow up. There's a volcano, and Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard have to go save it, to save the dinosaurs, okay. So one thing about this movie, and full spoilers because they're not even spoilers. They're really not. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
From the very frame that the two villains are in this movie, you can spot them.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Buffalo Bill, the guy that plays Buffalo Bill, you're like, that's probably a bad guy, and he's like, if not a bad guy, kind of a rough around the edges guy that people don't like.
He's the stand-in for Pete Postlethwaite in Lost World Jurassic Park. Same character. The only difference is Pete Postlethwaite sort of depicted positively towards the end, and in this case, they make him a full-on villain.
Yes, and the other guy, played by Rafe Spall, he's standing on the staircase. I was like, that guy's going to be the bad guy. 30 minutes from now, 100%, he's the villain. It's so obvious.
Yeah, the moment they reference the fact that, first, he's the clean-cut executive who's being brought in and being brought into not Richard Attenborough.
Yeah,
because all 4 of the previous Jurassic Park films managed to ignore the fact that apparently there were 2 eccentric old men who had this vision of building a park.
Yes.
And, I guess, it is true that Richard Attenborough's dead, and so you can't bring him back. But couldn't you just... why? I'm sorry, why? This was not a good idea. And
just say that he fucking died and this guy took over his research. Like, have a young dude or something.
Yeah.
But of course, then you couldn't have that big ass plot hole where the mercenaries are selling dinosaurs in his mansion without him knowing about it.
Which has no... honestly, here's the thing. You don't have to have James Cromwell in this movie at all. You can still have the girl.
Still have the bad guy.
Yeah, the bad guy will be, instead of him being this businessman and James Cromwell's there and such, he's still the businessman, but he's also the guardian of her.
You can still have the caretaker, the old lady.
Right. But, he's the legal guardian and he employs her as the caretaker, so to speak. And there you go. No need to have another Hammond.
Yeah, James Cromwell has no agency in this film whatsoever.
Now, don't get me wrong. I love James Cromwell.
Oh, yeah, everybody does.
It was just completely wasted in this movie.
Yeah. So we talked about the mansion, the people selling dinosaurs. So these mercenaries, they capture the dinosaurs from original Jurassic World, and they're taking them back to this mansion so that they can sell them on the black market. And one thing that I thought was kind of weird is that these dinosaurs are very, very cheap for being dinosaurs. For being dinosaurs sold on the black market,
going like for a few $10 million. Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing. It is the black market after all. And since this is an illegal sale, you can't charge too much because, you know, they still have to use money to smuggle them out of the country and shit like that. So I'm gonna say that those prices were probably fair.
But not okay, but maybe a little bit low for the Indoraptor at least.
Well, the Indoraptor went for something like $120-some million.
That's, I mean, I guess, but let's be honest. This is one of my favorite parts of the script, is that the Indoraptor is a fusion of the Indominus Rex and Blue the Raptor, and you can tell the Indoraptor who to kill by pointing a gun at somebody and pressing a button that fires a laser that syncs that person's heart rate up to the Indoraptor's brain so they know who to attack. That is fucking dumb, and it is hilarious. In this movie, it takes it completely seriously.
Yeah, someone pointed out to me the biggest plot hole of that whole laser thing is, you know, you're pointing the gun at the person already. Why don't you just shoot them?
Not only that, but they've got their heart rate. You point the thing at them, they're like, "Oh, I'm here, standing here like an asshole," and then you sync their heart rate up, and then they're getting chased by a goddamn dinosaur, and their heart rate's going to change.
Yeah.
And the Indoraptor is going to be like, you know, they're not going to find him anymore or something. I don't like that. The science of that is not explained beyond, you know, they're like, oh, what's cool besides a fucking laser that syncs your heart rate up to a dinosaur? You know, this is what many people have said before is probably one of the most expensive B movies ever made.
I do love how B.D. Wong has turned into like an evil mad scientist.
Yeah, he's fucking crazy in this movie.
Because I mean, in the first Jurassic Park, he's the starry-eyed geneticist who's just like, isn't it beautiful? And you know, and that's all his character has to do is to, you know, to show he shows expositionally what they do, as you know, at Jurassic Park, how they got the dinosaurs back, and then he disappears from the movie, and now he's a fucking psycho. I love it.
Oh yeah, it's great.
That I enjoy. I also enjoyed Toby Jones as the auctioneer for the black market auction.
Oh, he's so slimy.
Oh yeah, and the movie had some things I enjoyed about it, but I enjoyed it because it was so incredibly, profusely dumb.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think I've warmed up on it in the past week or so. As you know, when I got out, I was like, that was so stupid. But then the more I think about it, it's like, you know what? That was entertaining. It was the bad kind of, I mean, it was the fun kind of bad.
I will say another thing I want to point out is that it's nice to see Geraldine Chaplin in another movie. Mm-hmm. She is the surviving daughter of Charlie Chaplin.
Right.
And she played the what do you call it, nurse or nanny for the little girl
that forced the girl to speak in British.
Right, exactly.
She's like, I don't want a bath. She's like, bath, Queen's English. It's like, why the fuck are you making her speak with an accent? I like the part where Buffalo Bill shot the Indoraptor with a trank and then just fucking gets into the cage, and he's gonna take one of his teeth. And then the tail moves, and he looks at it, and then the Indoraptor fucking looks and smiles at the camera.
Yes,
it's like, hee, I'm gonna kill somebody. It does it, and then does it again a second later.
That smirk is amazing.
It's fantastic. Like the first time, I was like, wait a second, did he just do that? And the second time, I was like, holy shit, the dinosaur is smiling at the audience.
I can't. You know, I can't state enough how incredibly stupid this movie is. And here's the thing. The problem I have with this movie is that the second half, certainly, I have to say, the entire second half is enjoyably stupid. But the first half is just so by the numbers. Let's go back to the island, and then stuff happens.
Yeah.
And we're running from dinosaurs. And this movie was, I mean, it's set up for what is inevitably going to be a way more interesting sequel. Because if they make another one, then it's going to be dinosaurs are now all over the planet.
And I really hope that it's the same screenwriter and director, because I really want this level of stupid from the screenwriter and this level of I know how stupid this is from the director to make something even more glorious.
So I'm not sure I want it stupid. You know what I'd like to see? I'd like to see the person I'd like to see take a crack at this is the director of War for the Planet of the Apes.
Matt Reeves?
Yeah, Matt Reeves, exactly.
Yeah, that might be good.
Because, I mean, just put him in control of this, and what will happen when dinosaurs are starting to take over the Earth, is...
I wouldn't be surprised. I think Reeves is still kind of working on his Batman movie, but I would not be surprised if he put that on hold to do this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like a match made in heaven. He knows how to direct CG. Obviously, with the Endoraptor smile, dinosaurs are starting to get smarter.
Right.
Yeah. If you heard some explosions outside, it's because the next-door neighbor just lit off a firecracker.
No, I didn't hear anything.
Oh, okay. Sounded like a machine gun.
Great. I do want to say that despite the fact that this movie kind of sucks, and J.A. Bayona pretty much fed right into the dumbness of this movie, he has some really artistic shots here.
Yeah, the movie does have good cinematography, and I have to say, visually, this is probably the best Jurassic Park movie since the first one.
Yes, it looks terrific. One of my two of my favorite shots. One of them being when the Brachiosaurus is kind of like when the park is or the island is exploding and everybody's escaping, and the Brachiosaurus is like, "Oh, I'm dying," and the smoke kind of comes over him, and you see his silhouette. That was really great, and I liked the shot of the to steal something from Reddit, the Nosferatu Indominus Rex sneaking into the bedroom.
Yes,
the camera kind of very slowly pulls over the roof and down around in front of the doorway. That was a cool looking shot. Like, I really like the whole look, especially in the second half. Very, very almost gothic horror. J.A. Bayona is a great director in terms of for a lot of reasons, but especially in terms of visuals. He likes to have a good looking shot. He did A Monster Calls. He did The Orphanage. He did The Impossible. He makes good looking films, and oftentimes very good films of their own right.
And I have to say, as far as the performances, I more or less I didn't mind the performances. Chris Pratt was exactly what his character needed to be, Indiana Jones light, basically. Bryce Dallas Howard, of course, has, as just like in the first movie, very little to do.
Yeah.
And in fact, she has even less to do this time.
Do you think Colin Trevorrow appears to have a problem with women, or at least writing them?
Well, I haven't seen Book of Henry yet. I just haven't
really?
I have not gotten the motivation to, because here's the thing. You hyped it up so much for me as being like this train wreck, and I just... I want to give myself a little space first. So I can appreciate it on its own.
Well, I can tell you, just without feeding too much more into the Book of Henry, is that the main female character in the Book of Henry is a fucking dumbass. He spends the entire movie letting her 11-year-old, or however old he is, guide her entire life, even beyond the grave. And of course, in this movie and the previous Jurassic World, the women have nothing to do.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's what was she, like a veterinarian for dinosaurs, even though she's never seen a dinosaur before?
Yeah, that was dumb.
I mean, I'm sure they're
like the paleo veterinarian or something like that.
You know what? I bet that's a real thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made that comment. They make the joke of it. Yeah, that's a thing. So I'm sure it's a real thing, but it sounds like bullshit. In fact, I gotta look into this. Paleo veterinarian.
And while you do that, both her and the scientist guy were terrible characters that had no business being in this movie. She was like another character, and the other guy was like, "Oh, we have ethnically diverse characters, but this guy is a coward who screams like a girl, and that's the one thing that he does."
Okay, here's an article called "The Importance of Paleo Vets," and yeah, it's basically. Oh, okay, and it's referencing the movie and saying that this is a thing. Okay, so they do exist. All right, fair enough. All right, that's all I have to say. Paleo vets exist.
Nice.
All right, let's go ahead.
All right, so do you have anything else on Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom?
I've pretty much talked it up. All I care to say.
The only other thing is Will actually pointed this out to me.
Okay.
The sea monster that eats the dude at the beginning of the movie, that eats the ship, the little submarine thing, does not appear for the entire film until the very end.
Yeah, that's true.
So if he's just swimming around, what the fuck?
Yeah, and it is worth. Someone did point out to me also that in the first Jurassic World, that lake that the monster was in was like in the middle of the island, and they retconned it for this film to be right next to the ocean. So that's a thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's a pretty disastrous movie.
So speaking of disaster, next we're going to talk about a movie that involves a disastrous heist.
That was a clumsy segue, but I'll take it. I
know. Yeah, my segues tend to be hit and miss. So American Animals. We've already talked about this to some extent, but I finally got a chance to see it, and I'll just to refresh those who haven't. The film is based on the true story of a heist that was attempted at a university in Kentucky called Transylvania University back in 2004. And the movie is a sort of docudrama because it intercuts reenactments of these events that happened with interviews with the actual people who took part in the events.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite elements of the movie, which I didn't touch too much on when I was talking about it, because it's one of the most delightfully surprising elements of the movie, is that you get this weird blend of the real and the portrayed.
Right, and what's fascinating about it is just how completely how completely enveloped in this scheme they get, knowing full well that it's, especially towards the end, they end up going through with the heist, basically knowing that it's destined for failure.
Yes.
They have that desperate hope that they keep to themselves that, things are going to go well, but they know better. They have so many opportunities that they could have stopped. And it's fascinating. It's really what the main theme of this movie is explaining the paper thin line that you can cross to become a criminal and destroy your life.
And the fact that this kind of came out of a place of boredom.
Yeah.
These are rich kids with just, Evan Peters' character is just fucking around with a scholarship for sports, and he doesn't really care. They're just smoking weed all the time, and they just want to do something different. And one of the things that I thought was great about this movie stylistically is how they watch heist movies to figure out how to plan a heist. Not to mention Google how to plan a heist on the university computers.
I think the most brilliant piece of subtle film nerd commentary in the movie is in the scene when they're playing out and visualizing how the heist will go in their heads, and they're playing that fucking song from Ocean's 11, the Elvis "Little Less Conversation."
Yes, I love that scene because, you know, to the point where they just waltz in, and then Peters does like a ballroom a twirl of the librarian, and then he twirls her and then tases her in the neck, and the whole thing is this very dance-like, perfect execution of the heist that makes the Ocean's 11 look like they're slow on their feet.
Oh yeah, and it's perfect because this movie came out. I mean, Ocean's 11. The first one, the George Clooney one, rather.
Right.
Let's see, what year did that come out? I'm looking it up.
2001.
Okay. So that movie would have been fresh in these guys' heads.
It was 01, right?
Yeah, 2001. Okay. So the series is fresh in their heads, and so in their mind, they're going to be cool. They're going to be Danny Ocean.
Yeah.
Of library thieves, and then that contrasts with the bleak reality and the gross, just awfulness that the heist really is, which is basically, smash and grab and beat the shit out of a poor middle-aged librarian.
I really liked how they juxtaposed that with, the original envisioning of the heist is very graceful and acrobatic, and, they incapacitate the librarian, and then she's kind of no longer in the picture because they're so good at what they're doing that they're executing their job. And then when they actually try to do it, they fuck it up. She's miserable. She pisses herself. She's tied up and screaming, and everything is just a disaster.
Let me propose to you, by the way, a way that this heist could have succeeded, or at least had a better chance of success, and at the same time might have done a pretty good job of getting people more on their side. Well, if not on their side, but less likely to, okay, so here's the thing. Their first move is to basically tase the librarian. Mm. Couldn't they have just pulled out some sort of a weapon and threatened her? And at that point, I mean, she's it's not like she's someone who's going to defend herself.
I think the guys probably their concept of tying her up felt less inhumane than threatening her with a deadly weapon.
So instead of threatening her, we're going to tase her and then tie her up. So yeah, we're not.
Which is non-lethal.
It is. Well, it's worth noting that people have died from tasers if they have heart conditions, things like that.
Right, and I'm not condoning any of this. I'm just saying that I think in the way that they envisioned it, they wanted it to be a clean, non-lethal, safe theft.
Right.
And, they didn't want to pull out a knife. Because I don't know if they thought about this, but of course, I don't know if you tase somebody, if that would be armed robbery or assault with a deadly weapon.
Oh, it is. Absolutely.
Is it?
You are the moment you use any weapon, it's considered armed robbery.
Okay.
And the moment, it's battery if you hit someone with something, or
okay.
in the case of a taser, yeah, that's violent.
Okay.
So here's the thing. What they were doing there is it just shows how morally bankrupt these kids are, that they just are willing to do this. And what's strange about it is that moral bankruptcy does not come from the home. Their families are loving families who tried to give them, who tried to nurture them. So the question is, what drove them to this? And the answer, as far as this movie is concerned, is and the kids themselves, now grown up, was just boredom.
Yeah, and exactly.
How pathetic is that? That the thing that drives you towards your own self-destruction is boredom.
And the other thing that I thought was interesting about this movie was that for the first 2 acts, it's really funny.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then the final act, it just gets serious. And
Yes.
you know, when you see it, you know, I think the moment that's truly brought home is when. Well, okay, well, I'll get back to the taser thing for a moment here. So it's a Hollywood misnomer that if you hit someone with a taser, they're going to fall to the ground and just, you know, they'll be basically lights out, knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen.
Right.
It will destabilize the person. In most cases, it'll knock them off their feet, but they're still going to be mobile. They'll still be able to do things. So, you know, you have to take additional action. And so, whereas they thought, you know, hit her with a taser and then tie her up cleanly, they hit her with a taser and she shrieks, she's crying, she's wailing, and she's, you know, why are you doing this? Because that's what any person, these they did not consider the reality of the situation. And they were very much motivated by pathetic greed.
Yes.
And so what's fascinating about this film is that, first of all, it's beautifully directed and staged. And even though it makes it clear that what these kids are doing is awful, it shows the ramifications of that. And yes, all they got was 7 years in federal pen each. But you know what? They are all not. They're not right. They'll never be right.
No.
And even though they're starting to pick up the pieces of their lives at this point, that's going to be a lifetime struggle. They have to live with the fact that they did this.
Yes.
And that's a cross to bear. That really is.
It is. Kind of going back to the way this movie is made, I adore the stylistic choice of the sort of the unreliable narrator, where you had a lot of moments where, you know, I can't remember the names of the characters off the top of my head, but one of them be like, oh, when I told him about this, you know, we were driving the car and smoking weed. And then right away, you know, they would film that, they show that scene of them, you know, like, oh, I found this book in this library, it's worth $12 million. And then they interview the second guy, the real life guy, be like, no, I'm pretty sure that we were in a restaurant eating dinner when he told me about it. And then they film the scene again from that perspective. So you get several moments of really great, like the gist of the scene is the same, but it's a different setting or a different details because the characters remember it differently.
Right. And the way they hint at the fact that, you know, he thought that that he flew to the Netherlands and got a fence, and they put that doubt in your head as to whether that actually ever happened. And, you know, it's really one person's word against the other, but I like the way it plants that, because, you know, the fact is, even though they're, you know, being very candid about what they did, each one has their own perspective on the story, and is even, you know, they're trying their best to, you know, to frame themselves the way they want to be seen.
Yeah.
And I really liked this movie. This is one of my favorite movies of the year so far.
Yeah, I really loved it. It's probably it's up there as I've got several different films kind of fighting for my favorite of the year. You know, First Reformed, this, Thoroughbreds, but there are a lot of reasons for me to call this my favorite so far. And we'll see what happens at the end of the year. But it's one of the movies where I got out of it and I was like, holy crap, that was really entertaining.
Yeah. And when I think about it, this is, I would agree right now, this might be my number one movie of the year. First Reformed's coming close, though, so that's the tough part. I think this may have the edge, but I got to think about that.
Yeah, it's really got a lot going for it in terms of its style and mood, and and performances. Like the whole thing with them just walking into the library in old man attire, old man makeup, which the disguises just look stupid.
Here's the thing:
but they're really good.
As stupid as the disguises look, and you know what? We were going to end the with this, but I think this is a great segue. Their old man makeup was way better than the old man makeup in our next film, Uncle Drew.
We didn't talk about Sicario.
Yeah, I know. I said I just said a moment ago that I I wasn't planning on doing Uncle Drew next.
Oh.
But you gave me a great segue.
That is a good segue because the old man makeup in Uncle Drew is very bad.
Yes, it's like they covered their faces in clay,
which I think was probably the point back when they did the Pepsi Max commercials in 2012.
That's the thing. It may have been the point for. Here's the thing. That might work for a commercial, but this is a fucking movie, and
yeah, they've had to walk that back. Like, oh, we fucked the makeup up, but now it's got to be consistent. So we're just gonna have to stick with this shit ass makeup job that looks stupid for a whole feature film for 6 times the number of characters.
Yeah, there's no excuse for it, and that's just one small nitpick amongst so many issues with this movie, which has been garnering shockingly good reviews for a movie that I laughed not a single moment during the entire film. I think I cracked a slight smile 2 or 3 times.
I think I laughed once, but I can't remember what it was.
And yet,
I remember. Yeah.
I to the movie's credit, though, even though I never found it funny, I was fascinated by it. It's not a good movie at all, but there is so many bad decisions that went into making this film.
I wouldn't say I was fascinated. I was mildly engaged.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. They're really trying to make Lil Rel a thing because he had his debut as, you know, in a big way. He broke with Get Out. Everyone loved him in that. And so, you know, let's put him in another movie and let's call it Uncle Drew. Let's base but here's the thing. While it's Uncle Drew, this is the Lil Rel movie.
I saw a news page that said, "This is why Pepsi is making an Uncle Drew movie." I didn't read it because I didn't care, but I wish I had because I would like more insight for a 6-year-old concept made into a film by Pepsi Productions.
Yeah, Pepsi Production. What have they done? Any other movies? I'm curious about that.
I doubt it. Are you googling it?
Yeah, I just pulled up Pepsi. Okay, so when you pull up Pepsi Productions. It just goes right to the PepsiCo website.
Maybe that's not the term then.
No. That's the thing. Pepsi in Wikipedia it directs to PepsiCo. So yeah, I guess there isn't.
So there's not a Pepsi Productions. It's just Pepsi made a fucking movie for no reason.
Probably because they had to get their name on it somehow. I will say there's shockingly little Pepsi in the movie.
There's a weirdly little amount of Pepsi product placement in this movie. Like, it reminds me of my favorite example of product placement in films and how it funds a movie is Babylon AD. And if you've seen Babylon AD, you know there is a weirdly excessive amount of Coca-Cola product placement in the movie. Mm-hmm. Have you seen Babylon AD with Vin Diesel?
No, I have not. Okay,
so like there's this a couple shots of the skyline of Babylon or whatever the fuck the movie is placed in, where they're like gigantic Coca-Cola billboards on the buildings. The story goes that halfway through production, Babylon AD ran out of money, so they needed to figure out how to fund the rest of their movie, and Coca-Cola was like, "Hey, I've got a deal for you. You know, we'll help fund the rest of your movie, and you've got to feature us heavily in your film." And they did. So there's a hell of a lot of Coca-Cola product placement in Babylon AD because they funded about half of that film. which is great. And this movie made by Pepsi has less Pepsi product placement.
Yeah,
in that movie.
So I gotta credit Pepsi. They did not. I mean, there is Pepsi in the movie, but it's not featured so often that I can't actually remember any specific moments other than the PepsiCo Productions logo. So
I think in a couple of the early basketball scenes, somebody was drinking a Pepsi, but again, like you said, it's not really that obvious at all.
right, there's even a prominent scene in the movie in which Uncle Drew is drinking, and he's drinking a beer. You'd think that, you know, if Pepsi was hard up about pushing their product, they would have put a Pepsi in his hand instead.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say I would say. I'm not going to. I would say. I will say definitively that the Transformers films are much more egregious in their product placement.
Now, there are other pieces of product placement in this movie that are egregious, but that's, you know, when it's written into the dialogue, you know, I think there's two direct references to a lathe plus a poster in the background. And
it reminds me of 30 Rock. You've seen 30 Rock, right?
Never. Nope.
Okay, so 30 Rock, the show with Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin.
I know the premise, that it's sort of like Saturday Night Live back set.
Kind of, yeah. So like there's a cold open where this is one of my favorite moments of product placement that I've ever seen in a show or a movie, where the characters are sitting at the writing table and they're talking about how much they hate product placement. One of them is like, "Wow, this Diet Snapple tastes exactly like regular Snapple." And, you know, another character is like, "Yeah, this flavor is really, really good." And basically they're kind of like, the characters are talking about how much they hate product placement, and they turn around and they just gush over how much they love Diet Snapple and regular Snapple.
Yeah, that's fine. I enjoy, like, Wayne's World. They do that too. They have one scene in which they used all of their product placement, and it's brilliant the way they did it. And yet,
product placement is fine when it's done correctly. And I think that Transformers 4, which the subtitle escapes me for some reason, where they smash into a Bud Light truck, and Mark Wahlberg like cracks open a Bud Light, and he like takes a swig and then like slams the bottle down. And I guess that was supposed to be kind of funny, but it's like, no, they're just advertising Bud Light.
Yeah, when it takes you out of the movie, that's the thing. In those cases, that's meta humor. That's fine. But if you're watching a dramatic movie and then there's a scene in which the camera very prominently focuses on a box of Wheaties or something like that, I can't help but feel a little disgusted. And I know you got to fund these movies somehow, and you know, I can't say that I blame them for taking it. There's creative ways to have product placement, and there's less creative ways. Yeah. So with that said, Uncle Drew is kind of a baffling movie. First of all, you know, everyone knows at this point that Uncle Drew is about this old guy who's actually a professional basketball player in old man makeup, and that's the joke. That's literally the joke of the movie.
Yeah.
But the first, I think, 15 minutes of this movie, you don't even really see Uncle Drew except for that like news footage stuff.
Yeah.
And you know, the movie, you got to bring the hero in early if you're doing a broad comedy, you know. And I'm sorry, Lil Rel, I don't like his shtick that much. It was okay in, you know, I can't say that I minded it in Get Out, but I can't stand him in this movie.
He's a really good supporting actor, but his style of performance does not work as a lead character, because in this movie he has no one to really bounce off of.
Yeah.
Like he's just bouncing off of other really wacky characters, and there's not really any, when you have a wacky character, you've got to have a straight man to bounce off of. But he is the straight man in this movie for all intents and purposes, but he's still wacky. So there's just wackiness bouncing off of everybody else in this movie, and there's no ground. There's no grounding element for all the comedy.
That's well said, because Uncle Drew is a wacky character. Nick Kroll is a wacky character to the extreme. This might be the first. I enjoy Nick Kroll, but holy shit, you needed to rein it in.
I actually really liked Nick Kroll in this movie because he would show up, but only for like 2 minutes. And I thought he was pretty funny with his whole, I said this in the chat, but he considered stealing Lil Rel?
Yeah.
Lil Rel's girl in the movie. His name is Dex, right?
Dax, yeah.
Dax. He thought that the concept of taking Dax's girlfriend was just mind games to manipulate him and take him out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was kind of funny. He's like, "Oh, mind games," and Dax is like, "You're wearing my clothes. That's literally my shirt." And then Nick Kroll's character is like, "Well, maybe you're wearing my clothes." And I kind of chuckled at that line. It's like, that's stupid enough to be funny.
No, that didn't work for me. I'm sorry. He pushed things a little too far in this, and honestly, I can't say that I blame him, because there wasn't much of a script to work with to begin with. So most of the lines felt improvisational. And another problem with that is when the vast majority of your supporting cast are non-actors, basketball players with mountains of makeup on their face. You can't have an improvisational dialogue experience work that well, because these guys have trouble saying their lines as it is. Yeah. I mean, Kyrie Irving is probably the best of them in terms of giving a performance.
Which one was that?
He's Uncle Drew.
Okay.
And yet it's still like his old man voice is like, I mean, I thought Johnny Knoxville's old man voice was unconvincing, but holy shit.
I was going to say he sounded like he sounds like a worse version of Bad Grandpa.
Yeah. And I don't get why people thought that making this movie was a good idea, and I even more don't get how people are enjoying this movie. It's
definitely not funny.
No, yeah,
that's the thing, is that this movie doesn't really have jokes. It has like a funny line here and there. Like, I want to say it has an amusing line here and there.
Here's the thing. The absolute funniest line in the entire movie was already a joke that was destroyed for me because it was in every trailer, which was the "Hold my nuts" line.
I didn't think that was that funny.
I thought it was funny the first time I saw the trailer. I was like, okay, that's a badass way to make a statement to enter in the scene. But you see the trailer 4 or 5 times in a movie theater over the course of the last few months. And then you see it in the movie and you're like, hey, that's a joke that was, it would have been really funny if this was the first time I've heard it.
And then this movie doesn't develop its plot until it has to.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It
is kind of just like, this movie's plot and comedy are like if you put a car in neutral on a driveway and let it roll backwards very slowly.
Oh, yeah.
It just kind of was like.
So this movie is the car in neutral, and us as the audience are.
Our heads are behind the rear wheels of the car.
Yeah, we're the Anton Yelchin.
Oh, come on, man. Too soon.
I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to get things so dark, but it's the perfect example. God. I'm done talking about this movie. It's giving me a headache.
It's not good. The one thing that I really laughed at was when Kobe has been incapacitated and he tries to watch the final game on his TV in the hospital, and it's not working. So he goes out to the nurse and he's like, "My TV's not working." She's like, "Do I look like an electrician to you?" Like this patient at the hospital that she works at is interrupting her day. Like, I thought that was genuinely really funny. Just because she's being this huge piece of shit to her patient, and all she wants to do is work on her paperwork.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess by that point I had just given up on the movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's nice to find things that, yeah. So Sicario.
Oh man, I want to talk about the marketing for this movie.
Okay.
First of all, it's called Sicario Day of the Soldado, which literally translates to Hitman Day of the Soldier, which is fucking stupid for starters.
Manos, the Hands of Fate, which translates to Hands, the Hands of Fate.
Exactly. Originally, it was just going to be called Sicario Soldado, which that's okay. If it was just called Soldado, that'd be even better. But they need that brand recognition. And then a short time after they did that, after about 3 months after the first trailer, they had this really bizarre marketing campaign where they started introducing this Dia de Muertos skeleton for all of the marketing. It's like, oh, the skeleton factors very heavily into all the marketing, which that makes no sense either. This is Sony, right?
It's because it's Mexico. That's literally all the thought they put into it.
Yeah, but Sony distributed this, correct?
No. Columbia is United States distributor, and Lionsgate is international.
Okay, because this seems like the type of thing Sony would do.
Yeah, no, it does, but So first of all, before we start saying some negatives, I do want to say that I think that Sicario Day of the Soldado is a respectable sequel. Not a superior sequel, but a respectable continuation of the story. However, with that said, I don't believe that this was a movie that needed to happen.
I would call it acceptable.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a continuation of the first story where Josh Brolin's character and Benicio del Toro's character. It's a different sort of film from the first one, where it's not about the drugs anymore. It's about the immigration. Mm-hmm. And the movie opens with some immigrants trying to cross the border, and they're stopped by police officers, and then there's a bomber who kills himself. And then in the next scene, a group of suicide bombers blow up a Costco, including a mother and her child. That was a very effective scene, I thought, inside the Costco. Mm-hmm. Very tense, very upsetting. And then Del Toro and Brolin are unleashed upon the groups that are doing this to try to, stop them. It's just not as interesting as the first movie.
I think the main thing that made the first movie so unique was that you were experiencing the drug war through the eyes of someone who is just starting to realize how bad it is for the first time. Emily Blunt's character is she's a seasoned, trained soldier, with the FBI. And she when I call her a soldier because she has military skills and is adept at what she does. But the one thing that she hasn't seen is how it is the dark side of humanity, and just how awful things have gotten. And she meets these two people who are sort of like mentors in the world of darkness. You have Josh Brolin, who is, to her, it's sort of the example of, from the government perspective, he represents everything that's wrong about the political aspect of it, because he he is willing to bend the rules, and that's something that she just hasn't been, taught to do. And then Benicio del Toro is the boots on the ground example. She knows that he can't possibly be American, and that his motivations can't possibly be, that of policing. She knows that he's probably, a person who's done some criminal stuff, and it's watching her become increasingly disenchanted, and her struggle to hold on to her belief that there's still law in this lawless world. That is what makes Sicario such a powerful movie. Versus Day of the Soldado removes that innocence, and it injects, by following Brolin and Benicio del Toro as sort of the leads in the film. What it ends up doing is it turns the movie into more of just kind of a straightforward action thriller.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, like, Emily Blunt's character was very important to the first film because she feels like she's going to make a difference in this drug war. And then a lot of people that I hear have complaints about Sicario 1 are like, oh, I mean, Emily Blunt just did nothing. Like, she didn't really matter. And it's like, well, that's the point. She doesn't matter. Like, this is a war that you can't win. You just get sucked up into it, and you either die or you become less of a person because you can do nothing.
Right.
And I really love how that first film really drove home that just helplessness in the war on drugs. It's just violence and terror, and you can go into it thinking you're going to make a difference, but all you're going to do is get yourself killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely that's definitely the sense that I got. And it's also worth noting that the way the movie ended, Benicio del Toro's character it's strongly insinuated at the end of Sicario that he's kind of being set up to be like the U.S. government's pick for who's going to be the successor to this criminal organization. That they're installing him as like a as
sleeper.
It was sleeper, or like what the CIA has done before, for instance, in foreign governments, where they have installed their own dictator. Well, instead they're installing their own Don, their own Godfather, so to speak. That's what it feels like. But in this movie, they ignore that, and they just say, "No, he's in Brazil or something." And you want to come back to Mexico? Oh, okay. Oh, I thought he got revenge on the guy at the end of the first movie. Oh, no, this is a different one. Oh, all right.
Yeah, I gotta wonder if Sicario 2 is a product of Taylor Sheridan wanting to write a new movie, or the studio saying, Taylor Sheridan, write a new movie.
It might have been as simple as he needed the money to, pay for his rent so that he could write Wind River or something like that.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, while I'm certainly being negative at this point, observed on the terms of a action movie, I really enjoyed Day of the Soldado. I think it was a very entertaining movie watching it. It doesn't have the profundity that the first movie had, but it's certainly this is the that I'm trying to think of a good example.
I mean, you cannot follow up Denis Villeneuve. You just can't.
No, you can't. And
if you make a sequel to a Denis Villeneuve movie, you're not going to make a movie that is as good as what he just made. At least as far as we've seen, it's like Sicario also had Roger Deakins as the DP, which was really like, you have this shot where they kind of come over in the first movie, they come over the dunes, and you have this fantastic silhouettes of the soldiers against the twilight, and then it switches into night vision. Like, it's such a really well shot film, and this movie has a little bit of style to it, but for every really, really good looking shot that you get, you have another shot that just kind of feels really generic.
And it's worth noting that as a cinematographer, he actually, it makes perfect sense now that you mentioned that. My comparing this to an action film, because the guy who did cinematography on this, Dariusz Wolski, he has done cinematography for movies like The Crow, Crimson Tide. He did Dark City, but he's done a lot of action movies like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and such. So his experience is very much in that respect of an action cinematographer.
It's more immediate and dynamic than it is artistic.
And Roger Deakins, he takes things more slowly from a photography standpoint. That what makes it intriguing is the same action scene that would have been shot, really quick cutty and dynamically with a modern journeyman cinematographer. Under Deakins' expression, he gives it a whole new light by showing something you've never, showing the same thing, the same scene, but in a way you've never expected.
Yeah.
And this movie, it just, it also lacks Johan Johansson, unfortunately, because he passed away.
I know that was when I read that was really, really sad.
But still taken on, just from a basic perspective as an action movie, I think this was fine, and I will certainly watch a third movie if they make a sequel, because I had a good time watching this movie. If the thing is, the reason why I feel disappointed, even though I enjoyed this movie, is the first movie had so much to say about the drug war, and this movie does not have that much to say. It goes much more towards the broad action movie movement, and that's that's fine. You can make a broad action movie. It's just when you're doing that as a sequel to a movie that was so powerful, it's hard to not make that direct comparison. And so I almost wish that they had divorced this movie from the first one more, and rather than giving it the Sicario name, if they just called it Soldado, and honestly, if Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro were playing completely other characters, I would have been okay with that.
Well, that formula works for the Raid movies, where you have a lot of the secondary characters, the secondary actors, besides the main character. The secondary actors play different characters. And I think that's not a bad formula for an action franchise.
Sergio Leone in the Dollars trilogy. There are so many actors in those films who carry over from one to the next, playing completely different roles. And on one point, none of those movies, like technically Clint Eastwood's character in all those movies are completely different characters. But there's a connecting thread of themes, and that's all that matters, and that worked. So you can do that. It's a little bit unorthodox, because normally you would think, well, we're making this movie, we have to have direct connections, otherwise this is going to be, this won't be marketable. And the problem is, you're automatically, when the moment you say that, you're looking at the film as a piece of marketing.
Yeah,
and that cheapens it.
So I think there will be a third movie, because the director of Sicario 2 has said, I will not be back for the third movie. Because he feels that this franchise is similar to the, up until, next month, the Mission Impossible franchise, where every installment has a different director and a different stylistic touch. So a lot of people have been campaigning for Taylor Sheridan himself to direct the next Sicario, which I would be 100% on board with.
I would definitely be on board with that. But let me say this. Assuming Taylor Sheridan does not return.
As writer?
Either. Who would you like to see take it over?
For writer and director?
Yeah.
I cannot envision a different writer. But as director, I would like to see. Ooh, I have to think about that. What do you think?
So when you mentioned that, if his idea of it is, to have a different vision, a different vision with each one, then we would want another director who has. So who I would want maybe is someone like Steven Soderbergh.
Soderbergh is a pipe dream, but a good one.
Yeah, because Soderbergh has the ability to take a well-written script and make a just brilliantly edited movie.
Yeah, Soderbergh would be a really good choice to direct the next one.
Not to mention, he's already done an awesome film about the drug war, Traffic.
Traffic is amazing.
That's why I don't think he would do it, because he's already kind of done his.
He never does the same thing twice.
Right.
I mean, wait, he didn't do Magic Mike 2, right?
Unless it's an Ocean's film, he never does the same thing twice.
Yeah, right. Because Magic Mike 2 was somebody else, wasn't it?
That was someone else.
Okay, but he did the Ocean's films, but
that was really less of a movie and more of just an excuse for him and his friends to hang out.
Right. Well, now you got me thinking if who would want to direct the third Sicario film, if not Taylor Sheridan. I don't know. I'm trying to think realistically.
Right. Well,
I think the Coen brothers could do the shit out of a Sicario film.
They could, but that's not realistic.
It's not at all.
They wouldn't jump in on a franchise like that.
Plus, the Sicario movies, I mean, they'd want to write their own script, and Taylor Sheridan's script or his style of writing is not at all congruent with what the Coens are used to directing.
Yeah, I would say, let's see, another possibility if you're talking, directors who have a capability of dealing with bleak themes. Let's see, who else would be good at this? Oh shit, what is his name? Damn it.
What did he do?
I'm brain farting. Okay. I'm Googling it right now because okay.
What about James Wan?
He could do it. Yeah, I think that if you're going towards it being just like a flat out action movie, yeah, that's probably what
I don't even know flat out action. I think that James Wan could make a really compelling dramatic thriller.
Mm-hmm. So okay, Hans Peter Molland, the Norwegian director who filmed his movie In Order of Disappearance with Stellan Skarsgård.
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
Because he has this uncanny ability to just get this dreamlike kind of aspect out, and bleak visuals. He's great with that.
Mm-hmm.
And while at the same time, he can the way he blends humor and dark drama at the same time. Sicario isn't, there isn't a lot of humor in it, but it would be interesting to see him find humor in, some gallows humor in the situation. I think he could. I think that would be interesting.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, and plus, as popular as that movie was, a remake is headed its way, and friggin' Liam Neeson's going to be in it. It's going to be called Hard Powder.
I thought Liam Neeson was done with action movies.
Yeah, no, he's not.
Isn't he like 65?
I think he's 66, actually. Yeah. Wonderful, isn't it?
I mean, he even said that after Taken 3 or Taken 2 or whatever, he's like, guys, I'm fucking 60. I'm not going to do any more of these things. I can't do it.
Yeah, well, it's the thing is the checks spend, and he's got some family to think of, and it's retirement. He's not thinking of. He's going to continue acting. That's the old man action years. He's got couple more years in him. Just as long as he stops before the Harrison Ford, I broke my foot because something fell on it stage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's too far. You've officially graduated from action movies. Anyway, well, with that said, that brings an end to this wonderful pubcast. I want to thank you all for joining us. And next week we've got Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I may see the first Purge, but I will actually have to have seen the first 2 Purge movies before that.
Before you see the first Purge, see the first Purges.
Yes.
And I've got Leave No Trace coming near me, so I might try to see that.
I don't know what else is playing in my area, but I'll see if I can find something else to throw in there.
All right.
All right. Well, talk to you later.
Yep.